Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on which part of the world you're in. Thank you all for joining today's webinar. Very excited to have you all here today. We're going to go ahead and get started. So just before we jump in, just to get a flavor for where everyone's from, would you mind putting in your city or country in the chat box? I'd love to see what kind of diverse representation we have. Wow, Netherlands, Johannesburg, Italy, wow. France, hello, hello, bonjour. Michigan, wonderful. San Diego, London, wonderful. Wow, I love it. All around the world. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. So my name is Meera, and I'm an Ayurveda practitioner at Verve Holistic Health, which is down in Southern California. For those of you who might be familiar with Los Angeles area, San Diego. And I'm absolutely honored to be with you all today and hope to share some insight into the wonderful perspective Ayurveda has to offer on boosting either your well-being or for those who are practitioners, alternative medicine practitioners, your clients. So I would love to offer some of this insight and also with your loved ones as well at home. And with that, let's go ahead and get started. So just a brief introduction for those who might not be familiar with Ayurveda. Ayurveda is a traditional natural system of medicine practiced for more than 5,000 years, and it originated in India. It's one of the most ancient forms of healing systems still practiced today. And just to break down the word in Sanskrit, the word Ayur means life and Veda means science. So Ayurveda literally means the science of life, which alludes to that Ayurveda is much more than a system of medicine, but really it's a lifestyle that emphasizes health promotion and prevention, as well as addresses imbalances often referred to as dis-ease or disease. When the common person thinks about health or well-being, usually they refer to how they are feeling physically. But as many of us might be aware, especially if we're practicing in alternative medicine, that mental and spiritual health are equally, if not more, important. And so whenever there is an imbalance in any of these three, that is when we experience imbalance or disease. After all, the animation of life only happens when our mind, body, and spirit all come together. And emotional stability is one of those things where it's just much, much easier to say or recommend than to actually do, because the mind, as you know, is not the most easiest entity to handle. However, the mind is health encouraging when it's normal and grasps knowledge which it conveys to the spirit. So without the mind, the sensory experience cannot even be received or experienced by our spirit. And we'll dive into that a little bit later. All the senses have to be connected to a healthy mind, and in turn, it will take it to the spirit as an experience. And so to make this concept a little bit easier to comprehend, we're going to use this framework of body, mind, and spirit to take a deeper dive onto how we can actually gain emotional stability to boost our own and our clients and our loved ones' overall well-being. So a fundamental Vedic principle is that whatever is in the universe is within us, and what's within our body is in the universe. So everything in this universe is made up of 5 elements: air, ether or space, water, fire, earth, and our body is made up of the same in different combinations. So a balance between the 5 elements are very important for maintaining health. For example, you may be wondering how, for those of you not familiar with Ayurveda, but to give you an example, The water and the earth elements nourish our internal organs, our muscle, skin, bones, our mucous membranes, plasma, fat, reproductive tissue. And those are just some examples. And when there's an increase in those water and earth elements in the body, that's when we see imbalances, such as obesity and swelling, for example. And when there is a decrease, we see imbalances such as anorexia and weakness and such instances. And this is based on the Samanya and Vishesha philosophy, which defines basically that a combination of similars, Samanya, leads to an increase, and a combination of dissimilars brings about a decrease. And when we think of air, essentially it's the principle of movement, which is important if you think about it for the body, for example, to keep the bodily functions in constant motion. And ether is space, which is the basic need of all bodily cells, and fire is found wherever there is friction, which is necessary for transforming food into energy, for example. And water governs the body's biochemical functions, carrying the nutrients from one part of the body to the other. And then lastly, earth provides a firm foundation for global life as we know it and is simple to relate to. So to simplify how this works in our body, air and ether combine forces for movement, such as catabolic processes that take place in our body, known as vata or vata dosha. And then fire and water combine forces for transformation, such as all the metabolic processes that happen in our body, known as pitta dosha. And water and earth combine to perform all the anabolic processes in our body, known as kapha. So in essence, vata, pitta, and kapha are called doshas, and collectively the three doshas. So in essence, the three doshas are organizational principles that govern the elements in their functions in the body. From an Ayurvedic perspective, with proper diet and lifestyle, we can generally balance the doshas. However, the state of mind can also affect these doshas on a physical level. So now we're going to take a deeper dive into the mind. So the mind also relates to these 5 basic elements. In Vedic science, there are 3 qualities of the mind: sattva, rajas, and tamas, collectively known as the Trigunas. The Trigunas are the most subtle qualities of nature that underlie matter, life, and the mind. And all objects in the universe consist of various combinations of the 3 gunas. And they form at a deeper level than the 3 doshas, which we just went through, and help us understand our mental and spiritual nature and how it functions. So when sattva guna is dominant, our mind is balanced and at a state of peace and tranquility. In essence, you can think of it as an uplifting state of mind. And when rajas and tamas are dominant, they manifest various kinds of imbalances, which is why they are considered doshas of the mind. And we're going to dive into each one of these. I know it's kind of a lot for those who might be new to this concept, but we're definitely going to dive in. And rajas is the hyper state of mind, while tamas is the hypo state of mind. And these are both necessary, but they need to complement and balance each other. Unlike the doshas of the body, only when they are excess, they become abnormal, or the mind goes into a continuous cycle of rajas and tamas, and thereby causes diseases of the mind. And just as there's a circadian rhythm that helps balance sleep and wakefulness, sattva is that perfect balance. When our mind is sattva predominant, it creates harmony and balance and stability, and it's the guna of intelligence and embodies qualities such as compassion, generosity, patience, and brings about the awakening of our consciousness, which we refer to spirit. And we all have sattva within us. The repetitive actions of a sattvic nature, such as being selfless, whether that's through volunteering or putting others before ourselves, will bring sattvic memories and sattvic willpower to us. And it's only when sattva becomes depleted is there room for rajasic and tamasic thoughts. And we're going to go a little bit later into practical ways of how we can develop more sattva. So then we have rajas. Imagine if it's constantly daytime and we're on the go, 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 or the lights just never turn off around the clock, or there's always sunny days. Rajas being a hyperactive state of mind is the guna of always seeking something, but more in a self-centered or selfish type of way. The only thing constant for a person with high rajas in the mind is change. And thus they're very restless and often indulging in stimulation through various senses, whether that's eating tasty food, regardless of them not knowing it's not good for them, or constantly scrolling and swiping through social media to know what's going on in others' lives. Basically, there's a constant desire to gratify the senses. And it's in this state, it's easy to become jealous of others or have animosity towards others, whether that means keeping a grudge, harnessing anger, or being impulsive. In the rajasic state of mind, it's very, very difficult to let go of pride and ego. And thus, the person is usually very unforgiving, or they're prone to conflict and arguments. So it's important to view rajas as a spectrum and not an absolute, meaning that a person may not have all of these qualities per se, but just a subset depending on what combination of sattva, rajas, and tamas look like. So at a higher rajasic state, clinically we may see this manifest as anxiety, for example. Then we go into tamas. So now imagine on the flip side, if it's constantly nighttime or the lights just never turn on around the clock. So tamas, being a hypoactive state of mind, is the guna of dullness, sadness, laziness, and tamasic individuals tend to sleep excessively, and usually they have a very sedentary lifestyle with a general sense of disinterest. And due to the delusion tamas brings, they often feel helpless or even careless. And when tamas increases even more, it leads to one to be insensitive and ignorant because their mind is clouded and they just lost their sense of awareness. So while a rajasic individual engages in media consumption for stimulation purposes, on the flip side, a tamasic individual usually engages in media consumption to the point it becomes mind-numbing. And what a balanced individual would consider a disturbing visual per se, a tamasic individual may not react in a similar way. It's almost like a numbness. And in such a progressive state, tamasic state, an individual may often go about their day without having any kind of mindfulness, such as eating or drinking excessive amounts of alcohol. And clinically, we may see this manifest as depression. So you might be surprised that there are actual scientific studies supporting the Triguna principle, showing the correlation between the gunas that we just went over, sattva, rajas, and tamas, and well-being. And findings show that sattva is related positively to well-being, while rajas and tamas are negatively correlated with well-being. Ayurvedic psychology balances vata, pitta, and kapha in the body and increases sattva in the mind. So that's the beautiful part of it. And every emotion is a biochemical response to a challenge and has potential to disturb the doshas. Greed and attachment aggravates kapha dosha. Anger and hate aggravates pitta. And fear and anxiety aggravates vata dosha. So with this, we see the body is thrown off balance, and thus our well-being is thrown off balance by these emotions. And it's clear that disease or imbalance in the body starts with the mind. The key is shift our focus from body awareness to self-awareness. So we will now take a look at this connection on a deeper level, which is our spirit or our consciousness. So the greater presence of sattva, the greater emotional stability and balance the mind can be achieved. And now if I started from this statement from the beginning, it would have been difficult to understand. But hopefully you now have a deeper and better understanding of the how. So now let's dive into some of the practical ways we can increase our ratio of sattva compared to rajas and tamas using the same framework of body, mind, and spirit. So generally when we think about food, we attribute its effects to our body, just as in the case of Ayurveda practitioners, for example, recommending certain foods to balance the doshas. What's interesting and empowering at the same time is that food also regulates the mind, and that's why we see sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic food, which are material expressions of Trigunas at the physical level. Sattvic food that balances the mind are, for example, fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds, ghee, fresh foods, and believe it or not, food prepared with love and consumed with gratitude. Overindulgence in rajasic food causes the mind to become agitated, such as chilies, hot peppers, onion, garlic, food additives, food colors, fermented foods. And overindulgence in tamasic food causes the mind to become dull and depressed, such as meat, eggs, mushroom, frozen, and leftover foods. And by including more sattvic foods in our diet and encouraging the same for our clients, we can help them achieve balance that go beyond physical benefits. And I'm sure we all have noticed when we have a fresh food, fresh meal, home-cooked food, we really see, and probably feel the difference, especially if our, mother made some loving food for us. So although it's hard to verbalize and express, this gunas kind of gives us the medium to do so. Then something else for our body, waking up with the sunrise and winding down with the sunset. So we mentioned sattva is the perfect balance of wakefulness and sleep. And if we look to nature, the sun and the moon, for example, and follow its course, we can be sure to be in harmony with our environment. Waking up with the sunrise will give us the energy we need to sustain throughout the day. And winding down with the sunset will give us the nourishment our body needs to process and digest everything we took in during the day, mentally, physically, and spiritually. So you might be wondering what that means. Well, sleep helps relax our sensory and motor organs and our mind. So it's when our mind gets to communicate with our spirit without any physical distraction, such as our senses interacting with our external objects. And sleep helps to replenish the depleted vitality of our body and replenish the functional capacity of our mind. However, a good balance is necessary, as we saw earlier, in that sleeping too much can lead to or be caused by excess tamas. Then for our body, so we mentioned ahara, diet, nidra, sleep, and lastly brahmacharya, controlling the senses, are considered the three pillars of good health from an Ayurvedic perspective. The third pillar is, in essence, means to be mindful of not overindulging in the sense pleasures, whether that's overeating or drinking things we know that are not good for us, or consuming too much media, or that we know which is not constructive to our mind, or simply too much screen time. So we can take each of our senses in this way, our nose, eyes, ears, all the senses, and apply it to this, and making sure that we have that control to not overindulge. And as we explored earlier, the sense organs are the link between the external world and our internal environment. So optimal contact can be health promoting and too much, too less, or improper contact results in imbalance. So now what can we do for our mind? Ayurveda is really a means of bringing total awareness to every thought and action. So even if we eat healthy food, if our Agni or digestive fire is weak, it may turn into toxins. What's true on a physical level is also true on a mental level. The mind also has its own Agni or digestive fire, which transforms thoughts, feelings, and emotions into pure intelligence, which we call buddhi. When we digest or understand experiences, it lets our consciousness or spirit expand, and it allows for freedom. So freedom from what? Well, freedom from being bound by emotions, which happens when we identify with our mind versus our spirit, our consciousness. When we don't digest experiences, they become toxins, which initiates imbalance in the mind. So as long as we're caught up in the mind's activities, caring about our day-to-day life kind of mindlessly, we cannot see the mind as it really is. And that's why meditation is so important. There are so many different types, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but I really encourage you to try witnessing meditation, where you observe your mind's distractions. This will help you gain that moment-to-moment awareness, where you just observe without any criticism, without any conclusion, without any judgment. When we meditate, our cells become aware and conscious of thoughts, which in turn empowers us to release rajasic and tamasic thoughts and replenish our mind with sattva. So investing just 10 to 15 minutes a day in meditation can be really a powerful tool for well-being. So emotions have quite an effect on our breathing patterns. Breath or oxygen is vital to maintain health, and when we stop breathing, that becomes the end of physical life. So our breathing patterns change when we let our emotions get the best of us. The next time you're angry or upset, observe your breathing pattern. The more we can maintain a balanced pattern of our breath, the more control we can have over our emotions. Even simple breathing exercises such as deep abdominal breathing for 10 to 15 minutes daily can help bring balance to our mind. A powerful but simple technique is to breathe in an attitude of acceptance and positivity, and breathe out resistance and negativity. Tailor this to best suit you or your clients or your loved ones. For example, if you notice in practice, if you notice the client is prone to anger, it could be breathing in acceptance to change and compassion, and then breathing out anger and the past. So if a client is more prone to anxiety, or you're more prone to anxiety, it could be breathing in courage and breathing out fear or the need for control. The overall goal is to slip into a state of mind which brings clarity, and where positive change becomes more tangible because you're giving your mind that space it needs. After all, as we saw earlier, the ether or space element and sattva go hand in hand. So last, but definitely not least, we look to what we can do to nurture our spirit to achieve stability. Approaching life with a purpose and a positive attitude is key to maintaining emotional balance. Without a concrete foundation of having a purpose, one continues to carry on with daily life, went from one thing to the next, in which we easily forget and miss out on enjoying the journey of life, which is about embracing experiences to allow our spirit to grow and become nourished by those experiences. So if we approach life with a purpose, a positive attitude towards life naturally follows, and not to mention, it's much easier to implement than just advising a client or recommending to a friend. Try to have a positive attitude about an imbalance that they're having. It's so common to hear from survivors of major diseases how their experience have added to and enriched their perspective of life. So here we're taking a proactive approach to help our clients or ourselves or our loved ones prevent those imbalances by reminding them to define and remember their purpose every day. This is what helps someone wake up refreshed every day with a ready to embrace life attitude. And they are then able to experience firsthand that well-being is being happy for no reason. And finally, when we listen or read to spiritual or self-improvement books or audio, we're able to self-reflect on those concepts in a safe space. It allows us to expand and grow our consciousness, which in turn helps to keep our mind balanced. But with today's lifestyle, it's difficult enough to maintain our physical needs, let alone mental and spiritual needs. People often find later in life that the mechanical way of living was not conducive to their health. And even later in life, that they should have done more to nourish their spirit, which can be healthy even in the absence of physical health. It's interesting to note that in the study referenced earlier, higher levels of sattva and well-being were reported in the older age group. However, the beauty of this is now that we all have the knowledge to not wait until we ourselves or our clients get old to experience a sattvic balanced state of mind. And if you think you're old already, there are people who are older than you. So it's never too late to start. And so with that, I hope you all feel empowered with these three-dimensional tools to gain that emotional stability, to boost your well-being, and commit to nourishing yourselves through mind, body, and spirit every day. And I'm absolutely certain you can achieve the state of well-being and balance that you envision for yourselves. So make sure you envision that for yourselves if you're with your clients or your loved ones. And thank you so much for attending this webinar. I wish you an endless supply of sattva, and I'll open it up for questions if anybody has any. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for joining the webinar. I'm an Ayurveda practitioner. Yep, and what I shared with you today is something I definitely, not only in my experience, have found all of these to be beneficial and very practical, but also in practice through recommendations to clients. I feel like usually the focus, as mentioned kind of in the introductory piece of this, it's when you go to the, whether it's the doctor or, when people are seeking help, it's really easy. Like some people, you have your segment of, I need a quick Band-Aid, so, okay, I'll resort to medications or prescriptions. And, then there's people who, have been to so many different doctors and then they look to alternative medicine. And so you see those clients come up. And then, there's this, sometimes just the medicine doesn't work and you really have to go beyond the physical body. Same with herbs, for even like Ayurveda, clients who come to alternative medicine. I practice along with my sister who's a naturopathic doctor in Tustin, California. And you really see an array of clients who are, like I mentioned, frustrated or, even herbs are not, they help a little bit, but I think really to hit home and make sure that the wellness and well-being is sustainable, it's really important to go, beyond the body and look to the mind. Are there certain imbalances in the mind? We all know there's a psychosomatic connection. So it's really important to tap into that. And then sometimes you have to go even beyond, into that spiritual state. Are they motivated in life? Usually, it's unfortunate so many people, if they're depressed, you'll go to the psychologist, psychiatrist, which they definitely should get help. But just, being on medication for the rest of their life, I think something like this, if you have clients, to make sure you dive into, how are they feeling spiritually, mentally, and physically at all three levels. It's so important, and that's why I wanted to share some of this knowledge. And it's meant to just pique a little bit of interest. I welcome you to just dive further into these topics through your own research or self-study for yourselves individually. It's just so beneficial to make sure that we nourish ourselves on these 3 levels, even if we're not in practice. So I've been practicing Ayurveda a lot of my life, but in practice with clients just over the past 2 years. Do I have some herbs that you prescribe to help balance? Yes, so depending on the state, it's very, very interesting. So I'll give you just a few examples of some herbs. So Brahmi, or Gotukola, often referred to Centinella asiatica. Brahmi, it's very, very popular these days, is really good for the mind, very good to calm the state of mind. And another one is Shankapushpi, and I'm going to type them here, so if anybody needs the spelling or would like to look those up. Shankapushpi is another really good one, a lot of for people who have imbalances in the mind that's also affecting the gut, or if they had some visual, like for example, you know, I was in the military myself, so I did not go abroad. My sister has, and you know, there's a lot of, you know, folks in the military who experience PTSD and whatnot. So anything that comes in through the eyes, like disturbing visuals, or maybe years of, you know, maybe watching, I don't know, it could be many, many things, or they've had some kind of traumatic experience through the eyes. You know, Shankapushpi is very good at calming that mind and gut connection as well. There's a lot of, in Ayurveda, they're called a set of herbs called Medhya herbs, which I'll type there. And then there's also, you know, for example, if someone is having emotional, like, you know, we think of some people, you know, it's especially older couples, you know, someone died of a broken heart. Either their, you know, spouse had died and they die very soon after, something in that. So it's important to nourish the heart as well when you see those instances where maybe it's not arising from anger or, you know, per se, but what emotion is it arising from? Arjuna is a very good herb for the heart. So sometimes combining maybe herbs, you know, with something, Ridhya herbs, which we call Ridhya herbs for the heart, are very good. And then they're also very classic. Oh, sure, my God. There's very classic preparations too that are very good for the mind. I don't know how many Ayurveda practitioners we have here, but you know, for example, someone who, for the mind, ghee, which I mentioned is sattvic food. There are ghee preparations, and I've just put one there for you. Very good for the mind as well as gut when they're interconnected. Very, very helpful for clients. You know, so many different benefits, but those are just a few of the herbs. But you know, there are so many, and you can definitely tailor it to, you know, what kind of imbalance the client or yourself is experiencing. And that's my email address. I will put my phone number. It's a US number here. So if you'd like to WhatsApp me, that works as well. Are there any other questions? Oh, thank you. Thank you, Renu Joe. For arthritis, so it kind of depends what kind of arthritis, but I will just throw out some recommendations. You know, if it's more of an osteoarthritis type, and it, you know, it kind of depends. There's so many different factors, but I'm just going to try to be very general. External oleation, which we call abhyanga. Sesame, you know, seed oil can be used too, just plain sesame seed oil. For external, internally, making sure diet is good, but in terms of herb, there are different gugulu preparations. So for example, for osteoarthritis, Yogaraj gugulu, for example, that one is good. Whether it's inflammatory kind of in arthritis, this Keshur gugulu. type that there is helpful. In general, Google preparations are very good. So it really depends what, you know, the root causes. Sometimes it could be because of menopause or hormonal imbalances, and usually Grethams, for example, if it is estrogen related, I'm going to type it here. Shatavari Gretham, especially menopause. Shatavari is a very nourishing herb if it is due to hormonal imbalances and for women in the menopause stage. So it really depends what kind arthritis, but I hope that gives you kind of a good array of whether it's you know, osteoarthritis, more of an inflammatory type. If it's like rheumatoid arthritis, that'll be a different treatment, and you don't want to use any oils in that circumstance. And then for the hormonal and whatnot, Shatavari is a good, it helps definitely with the estrogen balances. Any other questions? And for arthritis, like we mentioned earlier, and we started with the 5 elements, you know, when Vata dosha increases, you know, especially if you have a Vata Prakriti, yeah, it's important. Yeah, so pulse is very helpful to have, because you can read a lot of things from the pulse. I know with the pulse here, you know, like I mentioned on one of the slides earlier, I mean, they have the different types. There's so many different types of Vata, Pitta, Kapha. There's 5 of each. So you can see there's like a Shleshmaka Kapha. Shleshmaka Kapha gets involved, you know, when there's joints. And so usually that becomes depleted. So that's why you hear the creeping and crepitus and, you know, cracking joints and whatnot. And someone with Vata Prakriti is going to be prone to arthritis. So it's very important to make sure to have the right balance of body, mind, and spirit. You know, understand what your Prakriti is, which is your natural base constitution, how you were born with. And that doesn't change throughout your life. Your Prakriti doesn't, but there's a Vikriti, which is an imbalanced state. And from the pulse, like Renujo mentioned, you know, you can really tell, you know, in the Veda pulse, actually, you can tell, you know, how much of each of these subdoshas. You can tell the elements, which ones are, you know, in balance. And someone who's been practicing pulse, you know, they can also tell from the pulse, the 7, you know, the different 7 levels. What is your Prakriti, your base constitution? What is your Vikriti? And then if you ever go for a consult with the Ayurveda practitioner, you know, there's also always a questionnaire to make sure, you know, they understand what your Prakriti is and then what your Vikriti is, your imbalances. So that way you have a baseline to be able to get yourself or your client back to. So it's really, really fascinating, and I could really talk about it all day. I know everyone has so many different backgrounds. Maybe you have, you know, Ayurveda, maybe you don't. But it's just, you know, a little bit of glimpse into, you know, how emotions really play on, you know, a cellular level, as well as spiritual level. So especially with different diseases, like, you know, more progressive type of diseases, you really have to work down on a spiritual level. And it doesn't mean, you know, for example, religious, but they're spiritual and religious. So it could be hand in hand, or it could be more spiritual if, you know, the belief system is not there. But like I mentioned in the recommendation, you really want to make sure you work with the client and, you know, make sure they're motivated in life. They're positive, you know, they know what they're working towards in life. So that's always very, very helpful for stubborn diseases, for sure. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining the webinar. I hope you all have a lovely week, and you know, feel free to drop me a note. But thank you so much for joining.